This video is about the decolonisation of Scotland. Some think that means independence, and it does, but it means something else, a well-known process, a process demonstrated through 80 years of decolonisation across the world. This is the victory definition of decolonisation. It's the process by which a colony, Scotland in this case, gains political independence from a colonising power, England, the bleak UK. Some people also refer to the act of dismantling colonial systems once you have independence. In this talk, I'm only going to cover the process. The bottom two paragraphs, I'm going to deal with that in my next presentation because there's so much in it that I don't want to distract and mix the two different processes. One is pro-independence, one is after independence, although it's good to plan ahead. So my next talk will be reclaiming Scotland's ancient constitution. As I proceed through this presentation, I'm going to talk about what the politicians wanted and managed to get some of us behind them due to lack of understanding. This is the misdirection of Home Rule. Then I'm going to talk to people and their processes in the 1800s who moved us to where we are today, to the National Party, the split of the National Party and lots of other parties, the National Party's move to a colonial administration. I'm going to talk about colonising theory before I summarise. I hope you find this interesting. First of all, the misdirection of Home Rule. I have covered some of this in one other video, but it's part of the whole here, so I've repeated some of it. Home Rule, or federalisation, whatever you want to call it, started by Asquith in 1843. This had nothing to do with Scotland, it was about the troubles they were having in their colony Ireland. And he thought it'd be useful if each part of the UK had its own little assembly to placate the natives. The Labour Party, in its growth in the early part of the 1900s, up until the end of the Second World War, for 20 years, talked a lot about Home Rule for Scotland, Wales and so on. But this, I'm cynical here, this was just a ploy to get votes because it was an up-and-coming party and they wanted members down in Westminster. And then moving forward to the 70s, when there was a rise in Scotland, a bit stronger than the past, for wanting separation. So Callaghan in 79, who was our Prime Minister at Westminster, brought in a referendum, and that referendum was for a devolved Home Rule Parliament. As you can see here, the majority of people voted yes, but we didn't get it, and we didn't get it because they didn't really want to give it to us, they just wanted to placate us. So 1 week before the vote in Parliament in Westminster, they changed the rules so that a certain majority of the total population who can vote had to turn out. This is actually the first act by Westminster ever to go against the will of the people in a properly constituted vote. This cheesed people off, and politicians formed a group called the Campaign for the Scottish Assembly. This moved on to March 89 when it changed its name to the Scottish Constitutional Convention. It was mainly all political parties, although there was some representation from one or two other third parties, business, so on. This eventually succeeded after they produced their report in 1995. The convention made a push to the Labour Party, and the Labour Party, with the two people here, agreed to hold a referendum which was held in September 97. This is for a Scottish Parliament. There were two questions. One question was, do you agree that we should get a Scottish Parliament? And the other was that it should have tax raising powers. As you can see, if you take time looking at this, the votes were yes. So in November 98, there was a Scottish Parliament Act in Westminster, which created the Scottish Parliament in 1999. It originally sat in a different building because it took them a few years to build the new Parliament you see here, and they overspent the budget by a factor of about 500%, but nevertheless they got the building. It is, however, developed now into a colonial administration, because power is held by Westminster, and there's nothing that the Parliament in Scotland does that is not financially controlled by Westminster, and they have the right in law to close it if they want. It also doesn't cover all the areas of administration in Scotland. It controls, now in 2025, 57% of Westminster's expenditure in Scotland. The SNP came to power in 2007. They had a minority government. They managed to get a flawed referendum on Scottish independence in 2014. What I mean by a flawed referendum is it was a constitutional vote about the future of Scotland, and yet they had this rubbish about civic referendum and everybody should be involved. But everybody knows that immigrants into the country, whether they're from England, Poland or elsewhere, you don't buy into the country, you buy into the country where you came from. It's only your children and your children's children that will take up the mantle of Scotland. A constitutional vote should not have included immigrants. This is the UN do it. The UN, when they have such votes, don't allow immigrants to have a vote because they haven't bought into the country. It did, however, in 2014, the National Party create a strong independence movement. I'll come back to the National Party, the SNP, later in the presentation. Now, the people. All the things I'm going to say now are all covered by decolonial administration. These things happen in most societies in different time frames as they push towards their freedom. If you do a Google search, just simply the early days of Scotland's independence struggle, it takes you back to the Wars of Independence, as they call it, which is odd because we were independent. It was the wars of keeping that independence, not getting it. And if you have a look, it doesn't say hardly anything at all about post-1707 and the struggle since that time. But if you take the time and dig into history between the two nations, you cover colonisation and the arrogance abuse of Scotland by England. I'm not mincing my words here, it's terrible. If you look at some of my other videos about colonisation and other people's work, you'll find that true. It became clear why Scotland has, through the ages, particularly from the 1800s, sought to break free from its southern neighbour, our colonial master. So there was a few riots that happened that are well known in Scottish history. This riot here was caused by the pressure of the clearances and also abuse of power by the landed gentry. There was another riot in 1787. This was pure oppression. In Scotland we were treated badly and we were given lower wages than those comparable in England. There's written records that show this, I'm not making it up. And there was another riot here, if you want to call it, and it was all due to the clearances again. These are colonial struggles, upsetting the people, oppressing them at a time when the UK, through the clearances and oppression, was forcing 4.5 million Scots out of the country to its colonies overseas. As part of this riot here in 1792, it wasn't just about oppression, it was actually also about freedom and wanting Scotland's freedom back. This was purely about oppression. Have a little read. These riots were all due to oppression by evictions, poor conditions, poor wages, and political grievances caused by the landowners and business owners with support of the people in London, the colonising power. They were taking over Scotland's lands, treating people poorly, sending millions abroad to escape the hard times. The people here resistance. I found these leaflets online from different times, and these were circulated in Scotland by people trying to get a movement that actually resisted the oppression and the unfairness that people saw. Most of the folders, not all covered here, from the 40s onwards, most were created by the Scottish National Party. This is resistance coming from oppression. There's lots and lots of individuals that are part of Scotland's story of resistance, political or otherwise. And here's some of the names of some people here. It's interesting that they wanted independence, and they come from different backgrounds. For instance, Hugh McDermid, he moved all over the place in his career, but he had a period of strong Scottish nationalism. He was a fascist. Robert Cunningham Graham, founder of the National Party of Scotland, as it was called then, he was a strong communist. It's worth looking into these people's lives. Bring them up in Wikipedia, it's interesting. Colonial theory says that eventually you'll get a national party, the SNP, top left hand side here, and as you actually get near and as frustration builds with that national party, because they're not delivering the goods as people envisage, a whole heap of other parties come. Some come, some go. This is not an exhaustive list, there's a few others. But the problem is, colonial theory says the National Party loses control. So here is the history of the SNP and how they have changed in later years. It was founded as a National Party for Scotland in 1928, and they changed their name to the SNP in 1934. The first MP was a man called Robin McIntyre. He stood in the by-election in Motherwell, and he took up his seat. Unfortunately, he lost it nearly 3 months later when there was a post-war general election. Things move on, and the SNP got a minority government in Holyrood. One of the things they did was change the name from the Holyrood Assembly to the Government of Scotland. In 2012, they went down the road and had a word with the government in London, and they asked for a referendum, and they agreed it. And they agreed it because at that time opinion polls said support for independence in Scotland was running around the mid-20s. But they did have the vote. It was a contentious vote due to the 100% of the media being behind it, and there was no voices out there to actually push in the media the independence opinions. And they actually broke electoral rules in the last week of the vote. They broke their own rules. And this vote, a flawed vote, happened, and Scotland lost. In that vote they promised that we're going to get lots more powers, and the Smith Commission was created. We got 2 small changes in 2016, and that was the promise, everything broken. all lies forgotten. But the rise for support for the SNP grew rapidly, so they went in 2007 from roughly 10,000 members to 125,000 members in 2015, and they won 57 of the 59 seats at Westminster. Under the claim of right, they should have not taken up their seats. They should have declared Scottish independence, agreed a date 2 or 3 years down the road for the independent Scotland being created, and that was it. But no, the individual members went to Westminster. The party got the short money for having so many MPs, and they settled into the new life, the gravy train. The same thing happened with Brexit. Every single area of Scotland voted to stay in the EU. They could have used a claim of right. They did try to continue using Westminster rules in the Continuity Act, and Westminster said no. However, Westminster did give that exact same act to Northern Ireland later, so Northern Ireland has continuity within the UK and the EU, but Scotland couldn't get it. So around the 1618 until today, the huge support for the Scottish National Party has fragmented. And that happened, first of all, within the party, when between 16 and 18, the leadership of the party made it a top-down party and not a bottom-up, and it removed things like the National Convention and various things, and they took away the voice of its members to the leadership completely. Even before this time, they started refusing to work with other nationalist parties. They wouldn't talk to groups that were set up to help on things to do with currency, banks and so on. Even today, 2025, they've just proposed that the vote in 26 at Holyrood should be vote 1 and vote 2 SNP. This means that the increased number of independence parties who are standing in the list vote will get less votes. It means that there will be more unionist MSPs from the list vote in the Parliament. It's because the SNP is self-centred and power first, maybe country second. During their time from 2014, they had several mandates to get independence, but they did nothing. There's no new path ahead. Their latest stuff, I've looked at it in detail, there's nothing new. It basically says, can we have a vote please, mister, to people in London. They're working within UK rules and they will fail. They're failing to use constitutional options that exist, and they've actually become a true colonial administration, which is what the decolonisation theory and reporting says will happen. And what about the independence movement itself? There was massive enthusiasm for the build-up to the referendum in 2014, and you could imagine what people felt like the day after the referendum. But they bounced back and they gave a huge membership increase for the SNP, the National Party. Support for independence actually rose then, it didn't decline. And the independence people created different groups all across the country. They created hubs where people from the public could walk in and ask information. They created an online indie app to allow the different groups to work together. That didn't work too well, but it's been recreated. There's been well-attended marches up to their peaks in 2019. But depression set in the movement because they started to realise that the National Party were actually playing the game to keep themselves in power and to use the Westminster route. They had damaged the party internally in the party roles, so for the first time the people in the country that support independence, the majority supported independence, but not the majority supporting the SNP. This is what happens in most decolonising theory trends based on what's happened in other countries. But recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, There's a new group called the Independence Forum that's trying to create a constitutional convention and also bring independence group together to do things. Also two groups working together called Salvo and Liberation Scotland. The IFS group works towards Scottish Convention and bringing the Yes movement together. Salvo is taking a different route. It's using the law and setting out to prove that Scotland's a colony of England, the UK, and going to the United Nations. Both groups are earnestly working for Scottish independence. If you want to know more about the Independence Forum, you can see the link to their website here and what they say they want to do. In 2022, Liberation Scotland and Salvo was created. They go down the UN route, which I've currently mentioned. I'm not going to go into the minute detail of decolonising theory. Under these different headings and others, there's lots of different authors that you can find out about, and if you're so inclined, read about it. These people have done analysis of independence groups and how they moved in different countries since the end of the Second World War, when empires collapsed. This book here is worth a read. It's about the whole colonial thing, and in Scotland, and it talks about what's happened, and it talks about the loss of culture, and that's why you need decolonisation, to get our country back. So this is a statement, one of many that you can get online, that is true in itself. You have to have political power before you can get economic freedom. At a colony, we have no economic freedom, and we have an excuse for political power just to keep the masses happy. There's a document in Ireland that talks about their colonisation and decolonisation processes. They actually talk about these different steps here to get independence. So where are we on that ladder? I'm going to talk about steps 3, 4 and 5. The dream comes from anger, the way you're treated. You don't have freedom, you don't have political freedom, and you're often oppressed. But you have a dream, you remember the past. Depending on how long things take, it usually at various times during their colonisation, the colonised people have riots, trying to correct things. They eventually feel secure enough to create movements, and they have meetings and leafleting, which I've tried to show in this presentation. And home rule is pushed by politicians to deflect the movement for independence and decolonisation, because a devolved and federal state on you, a once free country, just simply increases the control, but it makes some people happy. This is Holyrood. So eventually the people work together and you create a new national party. But as I tried to say earlier, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, the SNP have demonstrated that they're into Westminster. They'll only talk to Westminster. They won't use Scottish constitution. They won't just declare, due to the rights within the Union Treaty and the claim of right, to just with all their majorities, just say we're independent and get on with it. people within the independence movement have done things hard, and during this time constitutional awareness, I'm talking here about from the mid 1915 onwards, has suddenly increased across Scotland, and it's still increasing as a number of people in these groups understand more themselves and take action. You can take power and you can have a referendum, but it's actually getting it. You're not going to get it from the coloniser, especially when you are, like Scotland, lots of wealth for the country. We provide more to Westminster than any other part of the UK. In the last few years there's been a disconnect between the SNP and many activists. This is also part of colonial theory, and it mentions this happens. So you get different parties, and one of them, Liberation Scotland, has put a submission formally to the UN in March this year to prove that the UK is a colonising power and to get a UN administered referendum for Scotland. So these are the steps of decolonisation. The poster on the right here was created in the end of the 1940s when they created the United Nations. Unfortunately, Scotland's not there because we're a colony of England or Great Britain, that nice flag at the top. But we are there now. We're getting our case heard. We're being listened to. The UN are starting to learn. So here we are. This is the path to decolonisation. Depression, low morale to start with, after the 1707, when Scotland became a colony in 1708. There was riots that happened 2 or 3 years in the different cities. Eventually that moved on, and once the colonising power used millions of us to support their empire, there was despair and riots. But from the 1800s onwards, there was leaflets, hope and unity within certain groups that moved things forward, even political parties. And the National Party founded nearly 100 years ago. Suddenly, independent support due to understanding grew in Scotland because of the 2014 independence referendum. But from 2018 onwards, the SNP started to lose support, initially slowly due to the changes it did within the party and the party administration, which upset lots of people within the party. They started to lose membership. Because of this, many new parties came up, or 1 or 2 established parties like the Greens changed and became pro-independence. The Yes movement grew and grew, and it's been consistent, and it's slowly growing. My personal view, and the view of many in the independence movement, the SNP is not the way forward. They always go and will go by the rules that Westminster set. That will never work. They will do well, in my opinion, in the election in May 26, because people like me, who would not normally vote for them, but because of the constitutional question, I'll hold my nose and vote for them, because I don't want a unionist parties running Holyrood. And in 25 there's been a submission to the UN, and the Independence Forum that I mentioned earlier is pushing for a Scottish convention like what happened in the 90s to get different groups together. In 25 and 24 many branches within the SNP tried to get the SNP to be more forceful, to actually just declare independence if they had a huge majority. Just tell Westminster we're leaving. But at this year's conference, October this year, the party ignored all that, and none of the people representing that view were there or in the vote. They are sidelining support and keeping control. They're not really working, in my opinion, with the independence movement or the activists within their own party that are trying to change it from within. I've covered a few things and quite a lot in this presentation. I hope you found it interesting, and if you disagree with my views, I hope you can see where they're coming from. Before I go, I've done all these videos that you can get on YouTube. If you load up YouTube and type in @RobertAnderson9116, that's my channel, you can get a list of all my videos, or in the search bar at the top you can key my video name in as it's shown here. This is my plan for going ahead. I hope you found this video useful, and if you found it helpful and the look at my other videos helpful, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for listening.